So, I want you to do something for a second. Wherever you are right now, just hold up your hands and we'll look at them.
Like, really look at them.
Yeah, exactly. Look at the skin, the lines on your palms, flex your fingers, and just watch how the joints move. I mean, we are so utterly conditioned to exist inside these bodies that we take the sheer physical reality of them completely for granted.
Right, it just becomes background noise.
Exactly. But if you strip away that familiarity, what you are looking at right now presents this mind-bending paradox. Because the flesh, the bone, the blood pumping through those veins, chemically speaking, it is indistinguishable from the dirt outside your window.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The soil in your garden and the cells in your retina are built from the exact same raw materials. And yet this collection of terrestrial dust is currently animated by something entirely immaterial. Something that allows you to observe your own hands, to process this audio, to experience wonder.
Yeah, it's really the ultimate collision of the biological and the metaphysical. I mean, we are essentially walking, talking Earth, infused with a consciousness that completely defies the periodic table.
And that intersection right there, that is our entire focus today. We're doing a deep dive into the underlying biochemistry and the ancient theology of what it actually means to be a human being.
Right, and we have some incredible source material for this.
We do.
Yeah.
We are drawing heavily from this fascinating section of Ozair da Silva Mota's work, Analyses Biblico-Scientificas. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 7, which breaks down the human body as a chemical tabernacle.
That's such a great phrase, chemical tabernacle.
Isn't it? So our mission today is to map out exactly what we're made of, the incredibly complex biological mechanisms that sustain us every single day, and the moral weight that comes with being physically, undeniably tied to the crust of this planet.
And, what makes this specific analysis so compelling is its refusal to bifurcate the human experience.
What do you mean by that?
Well, often there's this assumption that you have to choose a paradigm, right? Like you either view humanity through the sterile lens of a microscope, just cataloging the biochemistry,
or you view it through the lens of ancient scripture, focusing purely on the divine spark.
Exactly. But Mota's premise is that when you overlay the empirical scientific approach with the biblical and theological approach, you don't get a contradiction. You actually get a remarkably high-resolution, unified picture.
Right, because, before you can really analyze the dust, you have to understand the breath. So let's start with that boundary line between the material and the immaterial.
Sounds good.
So the analysis takes us to the Genesis narrative, chapters 1 and 2, to look at the creation of Adam. And the specific sequence of events there is pretty striking.
Yeah, the order matters a lot.
Right, because the biological architecture was completely assembled first. The skeletal structure, the vascular system, the neurological wiring, it was all perfectly modeled from the earth. But it was entirely inert.
Exactly. It was basically an immaculate biological statue.
Wow, yeah.
The physiological mechanisms were all in place, but they lacked the catalyst. And in the Hebrew text, that catalyst is the Ruach.
The Ruach, that's the breath, right?
Yeah, the vital breath, or the animating spirit from the Creator. The text explicitly states that only when this Ruach entered the physical structure did the man become a nefesh chaya, a living soul.
Which completely reframes how we think about life, because the body alone isn't the human person, and the spirit alone isn't the human person. It's the synthesis of the two.
It's the combination, yeah.
It actually reminds me of the physics of a violin.
Oh, how so?
Well, you can have a Stradivarius, right? Masterfully carved wood, perfectly tensioned strings, just the absolute pinnacle of physical engineering. But sitting in a case, it's just wood and catgut. The music doesn't exist until you introduce the kinetic energy, like the friction of the bow that creates the resonant frequencies.
That's a great analogy.
Right. The physical structure is required to project the sound, but the sound itself is an invisible force animating the wood.
That is a very sophisticated way to look at it, and it maps perfectly onto the ontological argument presented in the text.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the assertion here isn't just poetic. The biblical and theological approach posits human spirituality as a definitive ontological reality.
Meaning it actually exists as a real entity.
Precisely. The essence of human consciousness, what the Greeks called psyche and the Hebrews called nephesh, is treated as a distinct entity that actually survives the dissolution of the biological structure.
Okay, wait, so when biological death occurs?
The chemical components follow the mandate. From dust you came, and to dust you shall return. The carbon and calcium, they just go back to the soil. But the conscious essence, the text argues, remains lucid and active.
See, I'm struggling to square this circle a bit, though.
How so?
Well, from a purely neurological standpoint, everything that makes us us, right? Our memories, our ability to feel pain or comfort, our spatial awareness, all of that is generated by synapses firing in the physical brain.
Right, the hardware.
Yeah. So if the consciousness survives outside that biological hardware, how are memory and sensation functioning without the neural pathways we know are required for those things?
And that, right there, is the exact friction point between a purely materialistic worldview and a theological one.
Because materialism says no brain, no consciousness.
Exactly. But the text addresses this by pointing to specific transphysical dimensions described in Scripture. It highlights two really vivid examples.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is from Luke 16, the narrative of the rich man and Lazarus.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so in that account, both men experience biological death. Their physiological brains have ceased to function, they're decaying, yet the narrative depicts their conscious essences as fully operational.
Fully operational in what way?
While they retain complete memories of their earthly lives, they engage in complex dialogue, and they experience acute, distinct sensations like agony and comfort.
So the text is suggesting that the brain is more of an interface than an origin point, like, I don't know, like a radio receiver picking up a signal rather than the station actually broadcasting it.
That is exactly it. The biological brain processes the consciousness for this physical dimension, but it doesn't generate the consciousness ex nihilo from nothing.
That's wild. What was the second example?
The second example the analysis brings up is from Revelation 6, detailing the souls of those who were martyred.
Okay.
Again, their physical bodies were violently destroyed, but they are described as crying out, asking complex questions about justice, and demonstrating an acute awareness of time and past events.
So the theological approach insists the Suchet transitions. It doesn't evaporate just because the biological receiver is broken.
Exactly. Which brings us right up against what the author calls the dogma of scientific materialism.
Yeah, because if you walk into a modern university biology lab, the baseline assumption is that only the physical matters.
Right, because only the physical can be quantified,
Yeah.
measured, weighed, you know.
And that materialistic dogma heavily dictates how we approach human health, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the text provides a pretty rigorous critique of this, breaking down the limitations of modern medicine into two distinct approaches.
Okay, let's go through those.
So the first is the somatic approach. Under this framework, modern medicine treats a human being strictly as a mechanistic compilation of biological gears.
Like a machine.
Right. So if a patient presents with an ailment, the physician essentially acts as a mechanic, looking for the broken gear, a blocked artery, a torn ligament, a failing organ so they can repair or remove it.
But wait, I mean, treating the body as a mechanical series of gears works incredibly well for, like, a broken femur or a ruptured appendix. You absolutely want a mechanic in the trauma ward.
Oh, 100%.
Oh.
And the author explicitly validates that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the analysis is not anti-science or anti-medicine at all. It acknowledges that the somatic approach is completely life-saving for biological trauma. The critique is that it is fundamentally incomplete if it's applied as the only truth of human existence.
Ah, I see. Because a gear analogy completely breaks down when someone is dealing with profound existential despair.
Exactly, which leads directly to the second limitation, the pharmacological approach.
Right. Because if you assume a human is nothing more than complex chemistry, then you are, by definition, forced to conclude that every psychological, emotional, or existential pain must have a purely chemical solution.
You nailed it. The text points out how modern psychology and psychiatry often default to treating issues like depression and severe anxiety exclusively as chemical imbalances. It actually describes this as an attempt to cure pains of the soul with pills.
I mean, we should be clear. SSRIs and other psychotropics do alter brain chemistry and provide vital relief for millions of people.
Of course.
But I see the point the source is making. If the root of the anguish is a lack of purpose or like deep spiritual alienation, flooding the synapses with serotonin might numb the somatic symptoms, but it doesn't touch the actual wound.
Right, because you can't cure an existential crisis with a chemical compound if the crisis originates in the immaterial nephesh.
Because you are only treating the clay while ignoring the breath.
Beautifully said. The materialistic science falls short because it demands we ignore half of our dual nature.
Okay, so if we accept this dual nature, if the consciousness is the unseen frequency animating the instrument, We still need to examine the exact specifications of the instrument itself.
The physical hardware.
Yes, the physical hardware. I mean, we've all heard the phrase ashes to ashes, dust to dust at funerals.
Sure.
It sounds like a nice poetic metaphor about the fleeting nature of life. But the scientific approach presented in this text proves it is staggeringly literal.
It is undeniable biochemistry. I mean, when you analyze the superficial crust of the Earth, the very top layer where ecosystems actually thrive, you find a specific dominant cocktail of elements.
Right.
And when you run a mass spectrometer analysis on human biological architecture, you find that exact same elemental signature. We are literally a walking, breathing reorganization of the ground beneath our feet.
The text actually uses this phrase, describing the human body as a spectacle of wet engineering.
Wet engineering. I love that.
Yeah, and it connects the concept of the blue planet to what it calls the waterman, because Earth is roughly 75% water on its surface, and the human body mirrors that almost perfectly, sitting at over 60% water content.
And that mirroring is profound when you look at the Hebrew word used in Genesis 2.7 for God forming man. The word is yatzar.
Yatzar. What does that mean exactly?
It's the specific technical term used for a potter working with clay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and if we look at the pure physics of that metaphor, you cannot mold dry dust. Dry silica and dirt, they have no cohesion. They just slip right through your fingers.
Right, you just have a pile of sand.
Exactly. So to create plasticity, to mold a structure that can actually hold complex biological architecture, you need water as a universal solvent.
So the creator, operating as like the ultimate bioengineer, utilized the planet's most abundant resource to bind the terrestrial dust.
Yes, our high hydration level is a direct physiological echo of the globe's hydrological cycle.
Okay, let's actually break down that dust, because the elemental table provided in the text is just wild. It notes that 98% of the Earth's crust is made up of just 8 fundamental elements.
Just 8.
And our bodies literally scavenge that exact environmental abundance to build our cells.
Let's trace the mechanics of those 8 elements, actually. First, you have oxygen, which is the most abundant element in the Earth's crust.
Makes sense.
Then you have silicon, making up nearly 28% of the crust. In our bodies, silicon is a trace element, but it's absolutely vital for the cross-linking of collagen. It provides the structural integrity for our bones, skin, and connective tissues.
And then there is iron, which is roughly 5% of the Earth's crust.
Right.
And in human biology, iron is the literal core of hemoglobin. The entire reason our blood can carry oxygen from our lungs to our tissues is because iron atoms chemically bind to oxygen molecules.
It's amazing.
Which is fascinating because iron-rich soil oxidizes and turns red, and our iron-rich blood oxidizes and turns red. We are literally carrying liquid rust in our veins to stay alive.
That is a perfect parallel. Liquid rust. And then we look at calcium, which is about 3.6% of the crust. Now, we usually think of calcium for bone rigidity, which is true, of course.
Drink your milk, build strong bones.
Exactly. But its biomechanical role is much deeper than that. Calcium ions are the fundamental trigger for muscle contraction.
Wait, really? Every muscle?
Every single one. Every time your heart beats or you flex a finger, it's because calcium channels in your muscle fibers are flooding open.
Oh, wow. And what about sodium and potassium? Because, I mean, those are incredibly reactive metals in their pure form. If you drop pure sodium in water, it explodes?
Yeah, they are. And they make up about 2.8% and 2.6% of the crust, respectively. But in the human nervous system, they operate the sodium-potassium pump.
What does that do?
This is the mechanism that generates action potentials. The electrical impulses that allow your brain to think and your nerves to feel, all of that is entirely dependent on the continuous exchange of sodium and potassium ions across cellular membranes.
So without those two highly reactive metals pulled from the dirt, human consciousness would have no biological interface.
None at all. We'd just be inert.
And the text also highlights magnesium, which is about 2.1% of the crust.
Yeah, magnesium is a critical enzymatic cofactor. For instance, ATP adenosine triphosphate, which is the primary energy currency of the cell, it actually has to bind to a magnesium ion to be biologically active.
So the cellular energy required to just blink your eye or digest your food relies on a metal extracted from the soil.
That's exactly right.
I want to circle back to oxygen for a second, though, because the math the author presents here actually tripped me up at first.
About the mass.
Yeah. The text states that oxygen makes up 46.6% of the Earth's crust, but in the human body, it's the absolute sovereign. It accounts for a staggering 65% of our total body mass.
Right.
At first glance, that just seems counterintuitive to me. If we are mostly water H2O, that's 2 hydrogen atoms for every 1 oxygen atom. Shouldn't hydrogen be the dominant element by mass?
It's a super common misconception, actually, but it comes down to atomic physics. While you do have twice as many hydrogen atoms in a water molecule, hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe. It has an atomic mass of roughly 1 U.
Okay.
Oxygen, on the other hand, has an atomic mass of 16 U. A single oxygen atom is 16 times heavier than a hydrogen atom.
Oh, I see.
So while hydrogen wins the sheer numbers game, the absolute weight of the oxygen atoms completely dominates your physical mass.
So when you step on a scale, 65% of the number staring back at you is literally just the weight of oxygen bound up in your tissues and water.
Yes, along with carbon, which the text notes makes up 18% of our mass, acting as the fundamental scaffolding for all our organic chemistry.
Which brings us to this brilliant thought experiment the author introduces regarding what we might call the alien element hypothesis.
This is one of my favorite parts of the analysis.
So good. The text points out that there are 59 different trace and major elements found in human biology, and every single one of those 59 elements have its exact naturally occurring correspondent in the superficial crust of the Earth.
Every single one.
Right. So if the Genesis narrative was just a fabricated myth, you wouldn't expect such a flawless chemical correlation.
Exactly. The author argues that if empirical science analyzed the human body and, say, discovered biological structures relying on an extraterrestrial isotope.
Like some weird space metal?
Yeah, or even if we relied on heavy elements found exclusively in the unfathomable depths of the Earth's mantle or core, miles below the surface. If that were true, then materialistic science would have a massive, completely valid reason to discredit the biblical narrative. The text would be demonstrably false.
But we don't find alien metals in our blood.
No.
And we don't run on deep core magma.
No, we find a 100% terrestrial superficial match. The text presents this perfect chemical overlap as a seal of authenticity for the scriptures. The Creator didn't source our raw materials from deep space. He utilized the exact layer of topsoil where biological life was designed to interface with the planet.
It is incredibly satisfying to see an ancient theological text, from dust you came, validated by modern mass spectrometry.
It really is.
But practically speaking, this raises a massive mechanical question. It's one thing to know we share a chemical identity with the soil. It's another to understand how that soil gets into our bodies to actually build our tissues.
Right, the logistics of it.
Because we require constant iron, potassium, and magnesium. But we can't just go into the backyard and eat a handful of dirt.
Well, you could, but it wouldn't end well.
Exactly. So that transition, how the dirt becomes human tissue, is what the author explores next. And to grasp the necessity of this process, we have to look at the staggering math of cellular regeneration. Our biological architecture is not static.
No, it is constantly turning over.
Right. The text notes that every single second, millions of cells in our bodies reach the end of their life cycle, die, and must be entirely replaced.
Millions. Every second.
This is the baseline requirement for maintaining organic homeostasis, healing wounds, and replacing shedding skin and stomach lining.
But the critical limitation the text highlights is that the human body does not possess an internal alchemical factory.
We aren't making the stuff from scratch.
No. We cannot violate the laws of physics to spontaneously generate new matter. Your body cannot magically conjure up a calcium atom out of the ether to build a new osteoblast for your skeletal system.
We are just the master builder. We know how to organize the bricks, but we don't manufacture the raw materials.
Right. We need a constant supply chain from the outside environment. The air provides the oxygen, the water provides the hydrogen, but the complex minerals, the iron, the magnesium, the silicon, those have to come from the earth.
Okay, but here's the problem. We face a severe biological assimilation barrier.
Yes, we do.
The human digestive system is entirely incapable of processing raw, inorganic minerals directly from the soil. Like you said, if you swallow an iron filing, your stomach acid might interact with it, but your intestines cannot absorb and synthesize that raw, inorganic metal into hemoglobin.
The soil is, basically speaking, an inorganic chemical language, and our biological absorption systems only speak an organic language. They're just totally incompatible.
Which means we require a translator.
And the translator is what the text beautifully terms the botanical bridge, or the vegetal link. Plant life serves as the vital biochemical intermediary between the raw earth and human biology.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of this because it's a process we completely ignore when we, eat a salad.
Oh, absolutely.
How exactly does a plant transmute a raw inorganic metal into something my body can absorb?
Well, it happens at the microscopic level within the root systems.
Okay.
Plant roots reach into the soil matrix and utilize a process called cation exchange.
Cation exchange, how does that work?
So the root hairs release hydrogen ions into the soil, which actually displaces the mineral cations like potassium, calcium, and magnesium that are bound to the soil particles.
Ah, clever.
Yeah, and then the plant absorbs these freed inorganic minerals. Then, utilizing the thermodynamic energy captured from the sun via photosynthesis, the plant's internal biology synthesizes these raw minerals into complex, bioavailable organic compounds.
They're literally pulling the heavy metals out of the dirt and packaging them into organic molecules.
Exactly. They take the raw, unusable earth and transmute it into a biological format that the human digestive tract can actually recognize, dissolve, and integrate.
Wow.
And we then absorb these translated earth elements
Mm.
either by consuming the plants directly, eating an apple, a carrot, a leaf of spinach, or by consuming the animals that grazed on those plants.
So whether you are eating a bowl of rice or a piece of beef, the origin of the cellular material is identical.
It all routes back through the botanical bridge. And this leads to a profound scientific and philosophical realization in the text. Every single living cell in your body right now, the physical material making up your optical nerves, your cardiac tissue, your brain matter, is sustained by an unbroken, continuous flow of elements that were physically pulled out of the dirt by a plant.
That completely alters your perception of a forest or a field of grass.
Right.
They aren't just environmental scenery or like carbon sinks. They are the active biochemical machinery keeping us alive. They are literally pulling our future human cells out of the ground in real time.
It's an absolute chain of biological dependency. And it is this very dependency, this undeniable physical union with the soil, that serves as the pivot point in the author's analysis.
Okay, we are moving from the physical to the ethical here.
Exactly. Because we are constructed from the earth and continuously sustained by it, our relationship with the planet cannot remain passively observational. The physical reality demands an ethical and moral response.
If the dirt is our origin material, we can't treat it as a neutral commodity.
Exactly. The text argues that this biochemical union imposes a severe ethical responsibility, a mandate that traces back to the very first instructions given to humanity.
In Genesis.
Yes. In Genesis 2.15, the divine directive wasn't simply to exist on the earth and consume its resources. The mandate was to care for and cultivate it. And the specific Hebrew word used for the ground there is Adama.
Adama, which relates to Adam, right?
Yes. It's the exact soil from which Adam was formed. Humanity was tasked with guarding its own physical source material.
And this brings us to a really fascinating real-world application of this theology that the author highlights. To illustrate the tensions surrounding this moral imperative, the text analyzes a specific, highly charged debate that occurred within the Brazilian parliament regarding land management and the occupation of national territory.
Right. We should pause here.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone listening, it's crucial to note that we are going to explore this debate exactly as the source material presents it. We are impartially outlining the two opposing worldviews without taking any political side ourselves.
Just laying out the argument.
Exactly, just reporting the deep dive text.
So the analysis uses this parliamentary clash to illustrate a deep dialectical divide in how modern society views the earth. On one side of the debate, the author outlines the perspective driven by certain economic and agro-industrial sectors.
Right.
This worldview is heavily rooted in economic pragmatism.
Let's map out that pragmatic side first. From an economic standpoint, the land is primarily defined as a resource. It is vast property to be utilized, developed, and extracted from to drive GDP, create jobs, and meet the immediate consumption needs of a growing population.
Sure.
In this framework, an untouched forest or an unmined tract of land represents unutilized potential. The fundamental value of the earth is tied directly to its yield and its utility for human advancement.
Correct. It is a highly utilitarian lens. The text then sharply contrasts this pragmatic approach with the perspective presented during the session by an indigenous leader. And the author observes that the indigenous perspective approaches the land with what he terms a profound ontology. In this worldview, the earth is emphatically not an object of possession.
It's not just property.
No, it is not property, and it's certainly not a neutral resource waiting to be liquidated. It is viewed as a subject of existence.
The text points out that the indigenous speaker utilized the rhetoric of the Great Mother, And that isn't just a quaint poetic title, right?
No, not at all.
It represents a deeply held ontological belief that the land is a visceral, indissociable extension of human life itself. The rivers are the veins, the soil is the flesh. It's a paradigm of deeply connected coexistence rather than a hierarchy of extraction.
And the author uses this stark contrast to highlight a psychological atrophy in modern hyper-industrialized societies.
A psychological atrophy.
Yeah. The text suggests that our technological insulation has severed our visceral awareness of our connection to the ecosystem.
Oh, I see.
The debate illustrates the gulf between viewing the soil as a sacred, living extension of humanity versus viewing it at the most extreme end of the pragmatic spectrum as an inanimate stockpile to be exhausted for quarterly economic gain.
It's the ultimate friction between utility and reverence.
Exactly.
So, mapping the source materials thesis over this, how does the author actually connect this complex socioeconomic and indigenous debate back to the biblical and scientific framework we've been unpacking? Like, where does the Christian theological perspective intersect with this tension?
So the analysis synthesizes this through the core theological doctrine of mordomia.
Mordomia.
Yeah, which translates to the Christian responsibility and stewardship of creation. Under the dual biblical scientific view presented by the author, the earth is unequivocally not a neutral stockpile to be depleted for endless profit.
Okay.
But interestingly, it is also not viewed merely as human property. The land is defined strictly as an inheritance.
An inheritance.
And more specifically, an inheritance temporarily entrusted to humanity by the Creator.
See, the concept of inheritance completely shifts the power dynamic. If something is an inheritance held in trust, you don't possess ultimate ownership, you are a manager. A steward.
Right.
You have the right to live off the interest, so to speak, but you do not have the right to destroy the principal capital.
Precisely. And because humanity operates as a steward rather than a sovereign owner, the author argues that our final accountability before the divine won't just be an audit of our personal, private morality or our religious attendance.
Wow, really?
Yeah, he argues it will include a rigorous, unavoidable judgment on our environmental stewardship.
That elevates ecology and environmentalism from a secular political platform directly into a core theological mandate.
It makes it completely inseparable. Caring for the Adama, the biochemical matrix from which we were formed and which sustains us via the botanical bridge, is presented as a fundamental metric of faithfulness to God.
That is intense.
It is. The text argues that it is sheer hypocrisy to claim reverence for the Creator while simultaneously participating in the reckless destruction of the very intricate, life-sustaining mechanisms he designed to preserve future generations.
It's a profound matter of structural integrity, isn't it?
Yeah.
To poison the soil is to poison the very building blocks of your own children's future bodies.
You're poisoning the supply chain.
Right. And what I find so compelling is how the author grounds this massive cosmic exploration of biochemistry and theology right at the very end of the chapter.
It's a beautiful ending.
After all the complex analysis of mass spectrometry, Hebrew translation, and parliamentary debates, he distills the entire concept into a simple, single-sentence prayer.
Blessed be our Lord God and Creator, who from the earth gives us food.
It is incredibly simple, but layered with immense scientific and spiritual weight. It takes this entire deep dive and turns it into a daily, physical posture of gratitude.
Yeah, it really does.
Every time you sit down to a meal, whether it's an apple or a piece of bread, you are actively acknowledging the botanical bridge. You are recognizing that the Creator is utilizing the raw dirt of the earth right in that moment to rebuild your cells and keep your consciousness tethered to this physical plane.
It perfectly bridges the empirical reality of our biological sustenance with the theological reality of our absolute dependence.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of territory today.
We really have.
We started at the absolute beginning, examining the boundary line of life, how the immaterial Ruach, the breath of God, catalyzed the inanimate biological architecture to create a conscious, living soul that actually survives the death of its hardware.
And we analyzed the literal dust, confirming through modern chemistry that we are an exact, meticulously organized reflection of the Earth's superficial crust, dominated by the sheer atomic weight of oxygen and the structural scaffolding of carbon.
We explored the sheer brilliance of the botanical bridge, realizing that the plants outside our windows are actively transmuting inorganic metals into the bioavailable building blocks our bodies desperately need to regenerate millions of cells every second.
Right. And we confronted the unavoidable ethical mandate that emerges from this union. Because we are physically forged from the planet, we are bound by a divine imperative of stewardship, holding the earth as an inheritance, and facing ultimate accountability for how we manage the very soil that builds human life.
It fundamentally rewires how you perceive your own existence and your interaction with the physical world.
It does. And if there's one final provocative concept from the text I'd like to leave you with, it's a theological glimpse into the future.
Lay it on us.
So the author suggests that our current biological bodies, composed of this terrestrial dust, are merely temporary laboratories.
Temporary laboratory.
Yeah, they're a transitional phase, waiting for a promised culmination where the Earth will finally return the elements it holds. But the text claims it will return them in the form of a glorified body.
A glorified body.
A permanent, upgraded state of existence, where the physical chemistry of the dust and the immaterial reality of the spirit align in perfect, indissoluble, eternal harmony.
Wow.
So I want you to think about that the next time you step outside.
Yeah.
When you look down at the ground, remember that every step you take on the grass, the dirt, or the sand isn't just a step on inanimate nature. You are walking on the raw material of your own biological existence. You are treading on the precise substance the Creator chose to breathe life into. And you are standing on this sacred physical inheritance you have been entrusted to fiercely protect until the end of time.
That is a staggering reality to carry with you. I can guarantee I will never look at a handful of soil or even the skin on my own hands the same way ever again. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the chemical tabernacle. Keep questioning the paradigms, keep looking closer at the mechanics of the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.